right, so we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, April 4th, 2019. Got everyone here except for Duho. Correct. Public comments on items not on the agenda. I've got one speaker card. If there's anyone else, please pull out speaker card. Brad, like to come up?
Hello, Commissioners. Fred Halvensack, Los Altos Square. I've been here before. Thanks for the time. City Council is going to be, looks like they're going to be taking up the CT zone issues we've been raising and maybe a specific plan under discussion next week, maybe in the following next few weeks. So I anticipate this subject will come back here for some expert review. I just want to remind the commissioners that what we have been talking about is specifically some three low-hanging fruit items. And actually, because this process has been fairly slow, the residents ourselves, there's about a dozen of us, have been actually doing some of the homework around what it is going to take to get these things done. So mixed use is one of the topics that we had discussed. The idea there is that our walkability in the CT zone is a very critical element of our neighborhood, qualitatively, and also our home values. The second thing is having robust privacy measures. This is something that the code has always relied on landscaping, and now with 5-story buildings on El Camino, we feel this is inadequate. So that's an item that the residents are not able to, have not been able to find a very strong consensus in the surrounding cities, but I think with your expertise and with staff, we can understand what are the things we can do there that we can put into code. Again, the ideas that we've been putting forward are maybe window designs that are prevent looking down into backyards and bedrooms, those sorts of things. And then the third thing is the fixing the multiple selections of the same item on the on-menu density bonus list. That's a tough phrase. We think that contributed significant to the bulk of designs that's been approved already. So with that said, I just wanted to make one or two notes here on the mixed use. The counter argument is that mixed use is difficult to sustain on El Camino. And I think actually there was a study from a local commercial real estate professional that showed the data that the vacancy rate in El Camino is anywhere between 0 and 7%. It bounces around between 0 and 7% of since 2016. That is not a sign that the market is suffering. It's things are being rented as soon as they're on the market. Within anywhere from 2 to 9 months is the data that this report suggested. This report is actually in the City Council meeting report for Tuesday. So 2 to 9 months for sitting on the market. That is, again, seems fairly reasonable, not ridiculous. So anyway, the point is that mixed use in El Camino, given we get through the details of each individual design, should be sustainable support. So we'll encourage you to take up some of this conversation when you hear the green light in terms of how we actually implement these three items going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers for items not on the agenda? Close that and move to the Planning Commission minutes.
I move that we approve the Planning Commission minutes from the March 21st meeting. I'm not sure if
I
that's
second.
going in the microphone or not.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes approved unanimously. And now on to item number 2, public hearing on First Place Village, 385, 387, 389 First Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Steve Golden, Senior Planner. The project before you is a development proposal that includes a design review and subdivision tentative map applications for a new 3-story mixed-use building with 10 residential condominium units, 2,100 square feet of office space, a rooftop common area, and 1 level of underground parking with a mechanical parking lift system. The zoning for this property is commercial downtown, multiple family, which is CD R3. Just a little bit of history with this project. It did come before you on November 5th, 2017 for a study session. At that meeting, you reviewed primarily the design of the project, and you provided feedback to the project's architect and the applicant. In general, the commission liked the project. They shared concerns of the project's height, especially the elevator and stair tower elements, the quality of the exterior materials, the fenestration design, visual differentiation between the commercial and residential portions of the project, and then how the project would anticipate a development on the adjacent properties. The project also went to the Complete Streets Commission. They did unanimously vote to recommend the approval of the project. They were concerned about some of the pedestrian amenities. They prefer a wider sidewalk along First Street. So we incorporated one of their recommendations, which was to obtain another foot of sidewalk through easement to increase the width of the sidewalk to 6 feet. The project did go to the City Council twice in early 2019 for a story pole exemption. Obviously, they eventually did get that exemption request, and those story poles were installed, and they've been in place for at least 20 days now. And of course, we're at this meeting, and then following this meeting, upon your recommendation, it will go to City Council for final action. So just a little bit of background of the project. The site is 9,771 square feet. It includes 2 one-story commercial buildings, which are about 3,100 square feet. And the addresses are 385, 387, and 389 First Street. And those are occupied with office, administrative, and personal service uses. And then there's existing surface parking to the rear and gets access primarily from vehicular access from the alley at the rear. Jump back. So the context of the existing site and the immediate surroundings is shown on this slide. It is in an older part of First Street, which is characterized by the mostly one-story and two-story structures. There's different types of uses in that area: office, administrative, personal service, retail, and residential. The tallest structure in that area, and the most recently built, is the project across the street at 396 First Street, which consists of 20 residences and a 3-story structure. The project, which is shown on that bottom photo, or the rendering of the project, is 10 units, and it would equate to a density of about 45.5 or 46 units per acre. This particular zoning, the CDR3, doesn't have a density designation, but we would consider this a moderately dense project within the downtown area. Just for reference, the project at 396 First Street and another project at 100 First Street each have a density of 50 units per acre. And there's a mixed-use building at 86 3rd Street, which has a density of 41 units per acre. So this is kind of right in the middle of those. This is the site plan of the first story of the building, the proposed building. So the main pedestrian access is from First Street. The project will be replacing the sidewalk along First Street. And again, we're asking through the subdivision process to provide an additional foot of sidewalk area through an easement, so a total of 6 feet. And that was a recommendation by the Complete Streets Commission. And vehicular access will be at the rear, similar to the existing vehicular access to the rear alley. There's going to be proposed 3 parking spaces at the surface level, and those will be primarily for guest use. And the ramp down into the garage, the lower level parking, underground parking in the garage, will be the main vehicular access into the project. Also, you can see on the site plan, they're going to be placing landscaping at the front, including street trees, and then some limited landscaping at the rear where there's the ability to put landscaping in. The project also has an interior courtyard, which is a private area, which will also be landscaped. Not very visible from the street, but will provide amenity for the residents and also the office tenants. Just a note, the alley at the rear is only 16 feet wide at the moment. And through the subdivision process, we're asking for a 2-foot dedication to increase that to 18 feet, which is our minimum standard for two-way traffic. So that's something that's already been incorporated into their tentative map and shown on the site plan. So the ramp down into the parking garage, where there will be a total of 26 parking spaces. There's 4 standard spaces, which are separate than the parking lift. It's a puzzle mechanical parking lift system, which has 22 parking spaces. There's a lot of engineering involved with that, but essentially, if you count up the number of spaces and you double stack that, it looks like 24, but they need to keep 1 parking space free at each level for that mechanical lift system to work. So a total of 26 spaces in the basement. The cross section here, or the cross sections, shows how that mechanical lift system works on the top of that slide. It actually lowers into like a pit area, so it's 2 levels. And then on the lower cross section, you can see the ramp going down into the garage. Also to note are the somewhat small on this cross section, but the height of the structure measured to the roof deck is 37 feet 4 inches, whereas the standard for a mixed-use building is 30 feet. And then the elevator tower feature is up to 54 feet, where the code allows an exception, which normally allows for a 12-foot overrun. So they're asking for exceptions to the standards, and we'll discuss that a little bit as far as their affordable housing requirement and request. I just want to point out also on the roof deck does have amenities for the residents, which will have kind of passive recreation and sort of maybe more formal entertaining purposes. There's landscaping, seating areas, and sort of a barbecue island area. As far as the elevations, just wanted to show some of the changes since your meeting in November of 2017. There were some minor changes and some more significant changes through this process. The architect received your feedback. Also, in response to the Downtown Buildings Committee, which recommended to have a peer review, architectural design peer review of projects in the downtown. The design plans were reviewed by an architect. It was the architect that worked on the design review guidelines to begin with. So he provided feedback, and the design again addressed a lot of those proposed sort of changes in the design. There's no mandatory requirement to address all the peer review comments, but in fact, the architect did do a good job in addressing a lot of those, and there is a lot of detail of that in the staff report with the attached peer review by the architect. With regards to the design review, the downtown design guidelines and the newer concepts described in the downtown vision, as thoroughly detailed in the staff report, we think that this project complies and conforms to those guidelines. Again, they're more guidelines, so it's not mandatory to address or to comply with all of those guidelines, but we do believe that this project does fit nicely within those guidelines. You'll also notice that if you compare to the project that was proposed back in 2017, the architect did make some changes to the exterior materials, hearing some of your concerns and some of the concerns by the peer review. Simplified the exterior materials to some degree. The base area, which now more distinctly, it's more distinct for the commercial space at that first story. The exterior material is primarily a stone tile, and then in the residential portion above, the exterior material that's being used is stucco and a wood cedar stained siding. So those were some changes from the original design, which had one of the materials was a metal mesh sort of material, and it was a little bit hard to understand the quality of that material. So I think now, at least on the elevation plans, we can better see how those materials are composed within the proposed project. And then along the side elevations, they did address your concern about how this project would fit in the current context of the downtown, since there's mostly, well, beside this structure, there's one-story buildings, excuse me. So they did dress up those side elevations with glazing. These are going to be spandrel glass, so they will appear as operable windows, but in fact, if and when those adjacent properties develop, they can build right up to the property line without a problem with this existing project. And then the rear elevation, and the architect will be talking more about the design changes, so I won't get into a whole lot of detail with that. And then they also addressed the commission's concerns about fenestration and tried to provide a lot of details for your review with regards to windows and doors and how that would appear on the structure. So the overall context of the building placed within the existing site, these are a couple of perspectives. There's more in the plans that were provided. We also have a SketchUp model of the downtown, and the architect incorporated the model of the building. So if you want to fly around the downtown or look at the building in different perspectives of how it fits in within the massing of existing buildings, we can also pull that up for you. And this is the project at the rear. Did want to point out that one of the major changes too, which our architect can describe probably better, which was to move that larger tower element from, it was at the front and the rear, and now it's more, it's more prominent at the rear, but it's off of the front elevation. So from the rear, you can see the visible tower, but it's not along that pedestrian corridor along First Street, which is the more prominent street. With regards to housing and incentives, the project is satisfying the city's housing requirements for 10% affordable units. They're offering one 2-bedroom moderate rate income unit. And with regards to the municipal code and our affordable housing incentives and waiver program, with a 10% offer, they can ask for one on-menu incentive. So they're asking for a height exception of 7.5 feet. They could actually ask up to 11 feet for that on-menu incentive. And then they're also asking for waivers for an exception for that elevator tower, an additional 4.5 feet beyond the 12 that's allowed in the code for an exception for elevator tower elements. And they're also asking for a waiver of the mechanical parking lift system because the code states a minimum area and clearance, vertical clearance and area for the parking spaces. The mechanical parking, well, the space, that physical space that the lift system is in satisfies that rule, but then when you add that mechanical lift in, that's where it doesn't technically comply. So there's a request for a waiver with regards to that. There is a number of findings that have to be made to receive the incentives and the waivers. It's described in the staff report for more detail of that. The project, we did do a preliminary environmental review on the project. It is consistent, the project is consistent with the general plan and zoning, and we didn't find it to, we didn't find that there was going to be any significant impacts of the project, and there is a categorical exemption for projects that are considered infill projects, and so we found this project to be categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the design review and the subdivision, subject to the findings and conditions in the staff report. That concludes my presentation. Again, the architect is here for more details and the applicant owner, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
So first, I want to say this was a terrific report, Steve. It was really cogent, and I appreciated that. I had two small questions. One is, if I understand what you said about the parking puzzle system, the spaces meet our dimensions. It's the fact that it's encroached on by the mechanical pieces that allow the cars to go back and forth. Is that correct?
Correct, and there are specifications that were provided in the staff report as an attachment. There's different sized lift systems. I'm not the expert in parking lift systems. The architect can maybe speak better to that. And there's also a video to kind of show you how the system works. It's like a 1-minute video. But yes, the space that lift system fits within does comply with our standards.
Because we've had some concerns from residents saying that since the trend seems to be for larger SUVs, that we should be careful that the spaces be of sufficient size to accommodate that, if that is what we're seeing more of these days.
So just to address that real quick, if you're considering one of these units and you own like a F-250 or F-350 or dually, you're probably not going to be able to park it there. So that might be part of your decision of, should I buy one of these units or not? This is an urban setting that the project is in, and so the parking garage does sort of reflect that fact.
Okay, the second question I have has to do with the Americans with Disability Act, which is, Are the units themselves accessible is there a unit that someone who is in a wheelchair could use?
That's probably a better answer or question for the architect.
I'll get him on the next
There is
class.
an elevator system which is required, but as far as doorway width and that sort of thing, bathroom
Okay.
sizes and stuff.
Those are my questions.
And thanks for asking the parking system, because I was kind of confused too. So the spaces are as per code, it's just that I'm going to repeat it for my own benefit, it might stick one of these times. It's just that the mechanistic parts of it might actually intrude, I mean, it can't intrude on the spaces or you'd be damaging the cars, so I'm still trying to. Yeah,
So-
can you, show us? Because there were so many examples, I didn't know which one applied, so, yeah, good, thank you, it's not just me.
So the code says you have to have, for a parking space, sorry, I'm jumping around too much.
And to clarify, we have no specific lift system code, so we only have these regular parking space codes. So that's what you're going to explain to us then?
Yeah,
Yes,
so.
okay, thank
So
you.
essentially, the code says you have to have a minimum area of 9 feet by 18 feet. Well, getting there. And then the vertical clearance is a minimum of 7 feet. So if you were to look at the actual physical space minus that lift system, the parking meets that. Then you add in the structural support, sort of the erector set with stuff, and that encroaches within that physical boxy space.
And I'm still having a hard time visualizing it encroaching, but yet not damaging the cars, so where is
It has to
encroaching?
because it has mechanical parts and it has a platform that moves up and down, so it encroaches within that box. If you take 9 by 18.
Okay, because
by
it's
7
moving
feet tall.
around, and so
Yeah.
sometimes it's creating.
But a
We-
car-
we can
a
show you
car-
the-
don't need 9 feet.
No, you don't need 9.
Actually, it's
Yeah.
the height, because cars are only 5 feet tall. And so anything over that encroaches in the 7-foot height.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to see a quick video, it's
Yes,
like a minute.
Oh, if you have a 1-minute video?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
It's from the manufacturer, so, let's see. So it's moving vertically and horizontally. That's what they call the puzzle.
But if the perimeter of this space is the 9 by 18, I feel like this is not a request we've gotten before, but we've seen a lot of mechanical lift that presumably have the same measurements. So what's different about this one?
To date, the city's only approved one project with a mechanical lift system, and that was the project at 4880 El Camino Real. In looking at this, the code is basically structured to deal with a static surface level or below-grade parking spot. And so staff determined that the most appropriate way to handle this, since we don't have specific codes, is to include it as part of a waiver. It's not to the level of an incentive, but obviously there's portions within that 9 by 18 by 7 cube that are encroached on at various points. So it isn't, to the letter of the code, compliance with that free and clear, but functionally it provides the space that a typical 9 by 18 space would provide. So that's kind of why it's more of a technicality, but it's very similar to the lift that was approved at 4880.
Right, okay, that helps clarify. It's more of a technicality being the key point. All right. Then my other question was, thank you. My other question was, we usually spell out how this fits in terms of providing open space. And I suspect it's probably fine because you've got a courtyard and a rooftop, but we didn't hear that in the very thorough report. So I'm just asking about that, or is that something you'd prefer to, should we wait on that question too?
Yes, so within this zoning designation, there isn't a specific standard for open space. So in CT zoning district, there is a
Okay.
requirement for open space, but CDR3, it's not a requirement.
Okay.
But the project does have, again, there's an interior courtyard at the first level, there's the rooftop area, and then there's balconies on certain units, so.
Okay, thank you.
I did.
So I'm not familiar with the puzzle lift, but how does it work if you have an electric car?
I don't think it works any differently, I guess, as far as whether or not there's going to be charging stations provided in this system or in the building. I would defer to the architect and the applicant whether they're addressing those resident needs.
Oh, okay, so there wouldn't be like a charging for every spot, or it wouldn't be like that?
You can,
You can?
Yeah,
yeah,
no.
but they can talk to it when they.
Okay. That was it.
Rob, can you remind me when the 15% requirement that we passed for affordable?
Yeah, so that became effective November, wasn't it?
It was in the
It was-
report.
But it was after, that became effective after this application was being completed.
So this application became, yeah, it was considered complete in October, and then the 15% became effective thereafter. The date is in the staff report. It's a footnote somewhere. Sorry. It's a pretty heavy staff report, so.
I thought this question, the design review narrative for new downtown development, I thought that was really also a well-executed way of addressing each of the issues.
That was the architect, right?
Yeah, I thought that was, I almost feel like this is something we should encourage other applicants to do. Am I missing
So-
materials somewhere?
So to specifically answer your question, the project was deemed complete on October 17th, 2018, and that ordinance, that changed from 10% affordable to 15%, didn't go into effect until October 26th. So,
Got it.
and the reality is this project had submitted way before that, and there was some materials like the density bonus report, some other things that we didn't consider quite complete at that time, but they had submitted, I think, like April before or something. I mean, it had been in process for a really long time, so.
One of our big issues with materials and color also is, am I missing, where are the materials? Where's the material board? Over there? That's it, okay. And then the other thing is, do you have the ability to go, you said you could have the technology, you have the program to show us above. Can you go into that courtyard? I feel like we talked a lot about it last time, and I'd like to sort of see.
Sure, I'm gonna let Zach drive.
It's
He's
his
a better SketchUp person than me. And he's gonna try to do this without a mouse, which,
So we're doing a bird's eye at the moment, but spinning around, and so you can kind of get a sense of how that courtyard is in the middle, and even though it's open on its sides, it functionally won't be visible and, to anyone outside of the building itself.
And it won't be open on its sides forever. That's, at this moment, we're assuming that there will be buildings on either side of it, potentially.
Well, and there is a wall, though I don't know how tall that wall is.
That's one story.
So you can, I don't know if
Give you
that's kind of
privacy.
giving you the view that you were interested in seeing of the courtyard.
I mention that because we had a project come through where an adjacent building tenant was horrified to discover that a building larger than hers could be immediately adjacent to hers and block all her light. And so the courtyard here will get light in the morning, in the summer, the way it's oriented, but once a building goes up on either side of it, it's going to be a light well, basically.
Is it possible to get right inside the smaller one?
This, when you say smaller what?
Sorry, the one on the right of the stair tower, the smaller courtyard.
Go over and down, maybe?
Yeah.
Kind of in this area here?
It's hard with the track back.
And there's the glass walkway.
How's that view?
Maybe if you could kind of see it from the perspective of someone in there. I was just curious.
I don't know, I can't do a very good job getting inside the building, mainly just spinning around outside.
But I don't know if the model is really developed to really get you that.
Yeah, the primary goal of this model is to kind of be able to understand the relationships on the outside, understand the relationships to the adjacent properties, and this model also has the building up the street, which you'll be considering in a couple of weeks. So there you can see kind of looking in at the balcony spaces and then the courtyard on the other side as well, and then you've got the parking off of the alley there.
And the drop-off, full packages
So.
and trucks.
Yeah, we can. So if you're looking at eye level, there, it's kind of if you're standing at the face of the alley, looking toward the building. But yeah, let me know whichever views you want. I can move over to First Street if you want.
Can I just see the entrance to the underground parking in the back facade? Please.
Let's see. Oh. Yeah. There we go.
Trees get in the way.
Yeah, those little adjacent trees are blocking my view, but you can see. Let's see, so you can kind of see, that is the
There-
garage entrance
there it
right there
is.
with the,
Okay.
The unit that's on the bottom, sorry, that's the entry to it, right? Also have an entry there?
That's just the hallway.
I don't know if there's any units against there, right? That's more just storage area.
Got it.
That's the way to the trash room and the hallway
Yeah,
for
I
everybody.
don't think there's any units on that side.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, so applicant? Zach, your time, please.
No. Over here?
Give it a shot. Okay, there we go, just give it a 9-minute warning.
Okay. A much smaller screen, I'm a little bit blind from here, so I'll do my best to run through this. Oh. Yeah, probably. I'll give it a try, that's a lot of things to hold. Good evening, Jeff Potts, SDG Architects. I want to thank the staff for a great staff report. We agree with their conclusions in their staff report, and they've certainly covered a lot of the issues here, so we'll try to run quickly through the project. First note is we posted the signs, put up story poles, met individually with some of the neighbors as possible, and as of yet have not received any calls or contacts, so I'd certainly love a chance to answer any questions of neighbors that may come up today. Steve Johnson is here. He's the developer of this project. He's a 46-year resident of Los Altos. His office has been in this building for almost 25 years, and he intends to keep his office in this building and move into the building as well to create a live-work situation for himself, which is, I think, an ideal situation in the downtown for these types of buildings. As Steve stated, it's a commercial office, about 2,100 square feet, keeping about 2/3 of the office space that is there, while adding 10 needed residential units to downtown and providing that mixed use. The project's on 3 older lot line, narrow 25-foot lots that are combined now and will be combined for the project. It's bounded on First by the street and on the alley at the rear. This area of First Street, is in need of some updating. There's some much older buildings there that could use some updating. It's walking distance to all the services and amenities of the downtown. It's got a walk score of 86, a bike score of 92. We're hoping people park their cars in the lifts and don't get them out for extended periods of time. Again, it's a mixed-use project, so it's keeping much of the office space that is there, which we felt was vital to the downtown and to Steve's business, and adding some needed residential units. The surface parking that we are having is at the rear and covered, which meets the downtown design guidelines. Really, we focused on the guidelines and the zoning and all of your various documents for the downtown in the design of this project. As you can see before, we had uncovered surface parking at the back and underutilized office space with very minimal front yard setbacks. That's on the left-hand side of the slide, and very minimal front yard landscaping. What we now have is a 2-foot alley dedication, which is going to help the traffic in that area. As future development come, the alley will get wider all the way down. We have covered surface parking and below grade parking. We have a mixed-use building. We have larger front yard setbacks than are required. It's a 2-foot required setback. Ours varies from about 3 feet to 12 feet. We did have the planters and seat walls, which at the request of either yourselves or the Complete Streets were moved back some additional space, so if someone was sitting there, they wouldn't encroach on the sidewalk. Sounds like now the sidewalk's going to come into that space a little bit more, and we're going to have a 6-foot sidewalk there. We have much larger landscape features at the street, a couple of raised planters, and then also an at-grade planter at the left-hand portion of the building, where we're able to plant some more significant sized vegetation. And we have an interior courtyard, which I will get to in a minute, is kind of the crux of the design of the project. I'm going fast because I know I have a short period of time here. Parking has been a large topic of conversation. So we have 7 spaces for the commercial, which is 1 per 300. We have 20 spaces for the residential, and there's actually 2 additional spaces, which we see that are on the lifts, which couldn't be counted for commercial, but we see potential for the commercial owners to either use those or the residential owners to have additional spaces. As noted, it's the mechanical lift. What encroaches is, if you saw in the video, there's little curbs that pop up to make sure the cars stay in their spaces. Like the white lines that are painted on a 9-foot space, they encroach into the space. Those curbs force you to stay within the lines, and those do encroach technically into the parking space. We see this sort of as self-selection, though. You're not going to buy a downtown unit knowing that you have a car that you can't park on the premises. You'll either decide not to buy the unit or get a smaller car, make a different car choice. So the surface parking at the rear will be office and guest, although there's no guest required. The standard spaces in the garage are for the office, and the lift spaces would be for the residents. We also see potential for some live-work situations here, as Mr. Johnson is planning on doing, which will create some extra parking capacity, really, because the commercial and the residential vehicle will be one and the same. So that's the parking situation. The main design concept, the courtyard design, was created so that we could maintain a building with a full street width, frontage width. So more like Main Street, where the buildings all abut each other. You don't have little 8 to 10 foot alleys in between each and every building. And so we came up with the courtyard concept, which would allow us to get windows, light, the units oriented to the courtyard, oriented to the street, and still provide that street width along both the alley and the rear. The courtyard also allows the neighboring sites to develop in a similar fashion if they choose. We would hope they would choose to do so, but we're well aware of the fact that they don't have to do that. And the buyers will be made well aware of the fact that they don't have to do that as well. Also, the concept, because it's a full street width, allows for a variety of design styles to be sort of stacked together like you would get downtown, where you've got similar but different buildings all touching each other. The first floor has the 2 commercial spaces at the front, again totaling about 2,100 square feet. There's 1 condo on the first floor, which is oriented to the courtyard. At the back, we have the trash room and storage units for each of the residential units, and then there's a fitness common interior space. The courtyard to the left that we were kind of diving into really just opens only to the fitness space. It's really just more of a ventilation and kind of a nice exterior space for that fitness space. And then the larger courtyard is open to several of the units, 1 on the first floor and 2 on each of the subsequent floors. Again, we're exceeding the front yard setbacks by quite a bit in this area and providing much more abundant landscaping. Second floor is basically 5 condo units, 2 that face the street, 2 that face the alley, and 1 that really faces the courtyard. The unit on the back left is actually a 2-story loft unit that faces the alley, so you'll see its upper floor on the 3rd floor plan, and then the other units repeated. The roof plan, we went with a flat roof style and this sort of contemporary design. It provides less height. I mean, that's one of the main reasons. We also wanted the roof deck. We've moved the elevator and stair tower to the rear of the building based on our previous workshop. And what we did is we reduced the deck itself to a size that would allow us to only have 1 stair. So previously we had 2 stairs because the deck space itself required 2 exits by code. One of the exits was at the front of the building, which created a much taller tower. So we've reduced that space and therefore removed that stair tower at the front of the building, which I think was one of the main design changes that was sought from the workshop and going through the peer review. Again, here you'll see basically, and Steve had 2 of these up. We've included the interim step. We did make a pass at changes after the workshop, and then the peer review was subsequent to that. And that's where we've gotten where we are. The elevation design concept, contemporary style, which blends nicely with some of the newer buildings in the area, Packard Foundation, the building at the corner. The style allows a lot of flexibility in massing, material, features, so that, should additional buildings be butted up against it, they can blend nicely together. High quality material, we've got a stone base, wood and stucco, and then we've got metal railings and awning details and a trellis detail. And again, the building form keeps the height to a minimum along the skyline. All the building entries face the street now. The residential entry is defined by the center portion. It's scaled down to more of a residential scale, and it's got sort of the wood accent that kind of gives you the signal that that's a little different than the other entries. The vertical wood element defines that entry. It breaks the massing of the building down into several segments so that it's not one large massing along the street. We've got a stone base and storefront at all of the commercial spaces, which really sort of define those spaces as the commercial space. And then we've got the planter areas in front of there to help break down the scale. Am I out of time already?
Is that the 9-minute warning or? Okay. Any questions?
I do. I wanted to ask about EV chargers.
Yes, so, and I will answer, I would love to answer all your questions and go through the rest of this.
Perhaps it shows up on the rest of the drawings.
Can I keep going?
No.
The lifts are capable of having an EV charger at each lift.
Oh, cool.
It's similar to, placing an EV charger in a regular parking space, so they do have that capability. There is a certain percentage that will be required, based on the current codes that will be installed. There will be solar installed on this project. I didn't get to that. To answer, I wanted to make sure I answered the other questions. The ADA adaptability, the building doesn't require an elevator, but since we've put an elevator in it, all of the units are required to be adaptable.
Excellent.
So every unit has that ability to be adapted, based on the code in a simple fashion to be ADA useful. The open space question, there is not an open space require.
Sorry, can I interrupt just to ask a follow-on question to the eight?
Sure.
Okay, I have one more question. I'll get that microphone back there.
Just so, because you added elevator, the units are required to be ADA?
Correct. If there was no elevator, only the unit on the ground floor would be required to be ADA based on the building code, Chapter 11A. Once you add an elevator, all floors become the ground floor. It's technical.
And so what about the rooftop?
The rooftop is required to be accessible. All common spaces are required to be accessible, whether or not you have an elevator or an ADA unit.
So you have the elevator going up to the rooftop?
Correct.
And, right, and then it's elevator machine room on top of elevator access to the
It's
roof.
not the machine room, but it is the clearance required for the hoist beam
Yeah.
and some of the
Right,
mechanical
so-
things of that nature.
So my other question has to do with delivery trucks and loading zone and picking up garbage. How do you foresee that working?
The garbage is currently picked up in the alley, and we foresee the garbage being picked up the same way. There's a roll-up door that aligns basically with the ADA clear space.
Got it.
So the trash will be rolled out, picked up, rolled back in. That'll either be done by the trash company at a fee, or the property management will have to bring it out at the appropriate time.
Okay, so back to the lift, we all seem to have a fascination with it. One thing, so we approved one, and then after that, I seem to recall that our ordinance, at least on the CT zone, I don't know, maybe I'm imagining this, but I thought we required a backup generator for the mechanical lift system. Do you have one?
I believe it required battery backup for the lift system, and we would put that in place.
Yeah, the planning commission had made recommendations regarding a lift system, however, they were not adopted at the city council level.
Ah, okay, so, but you have intended battery backup?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the courtyards, at the end of each courtyard where potentially the buildings may be built, I notice there's a wall. Do you know, what is the height on that wall? It looks like it's less than 1 story, but maybe
Yeah,
it's not.
it's about 8 feet. It was really just to create a privacy
Okay.
buffer there. I mean, we could certainly foresee someone creating a similar building and connecting the courtyards depending on the situation.
Okay, great, that's my questions.
Do you have a detail for the railing? I see it throughout, but I don't actually see like a detail spelled out. There's a lot of them.
The metal railing?
Yeah.
Windows.
Yeah, I mean, reads very horizontal. I'd like to see what the detail is.
Sorry, too many things in my hand here.
I know, they're very small, and I don't know that if there's no detail spelled out, are they really like married to?
The-
Oh, A19?
The idea behind the railing was sort of,
Those are, I see those as inspiration images where.
yeah, those are definitely just inspirational ideas. The idea behind the railing was based on the railing on the Packard Foundation, which is kind of very flat and deep. And we just basically added an extra rail at the top for detail.
I agree that it's an important detail. So it's not in here. Okay.
Or the stone, do we have the stone?
Do you have a sample of the metal too? I think that's the stone.
That's
in front
the
of
stone
it.
in front of me. It's very heavy. That's why I didn't bring it up there. That's why they're not all on one page. We do not have a sample of the metal.
Is it black?
It'd be a painted awnings, painted metal, and they'd be like a dark bronze. The intention is to have like a dark bronze metal, aluminum clad wood window or metal clad wood window. Sorry. I'll let you know. More
Okay,
questions?
no, that's it. The applicant.
Um, the commercial spots on the underground, would those be considered commercial 24/7 or like flex for the residents to have?
I think they're basically considered commercial, but I don't think they'll be restricted to that, although resident parking would be restricted to the lift, so there may be a
Yeah.
guest
Yes, yeah.
overlap
Okay.
in those spaces.
Okay, potentially.
And again, we have a couple of extra residential spaces at this point in time.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, my questions. Is there a garage door to secure the garage?
I don't think we've detailed a garage door to secure the garage at this point, but we certainly could do a remote control of some sort on a timer or just on a remote, depending if we want to completely restrict the garage from any office visitor type of use.
Okay, but right now the plan is to just create.
Right now, it's open, yes.
And if we could go back to the elevator tower, it looks massive and looks like it's housing perhaps more than just an elevator. If you look at the lower left,
Yes, that's the stair tower and the elevator tower incorporated into one. We had them at the different heights for the stair and the elevator, and it looked very strange architecturally. So the stair comes up in the same area as the elevator. So you can see at the roof on the far left, the stair comes up at the same area as the elevator, and we've just enclosed it in one structure instead of trying to break it into two different structures of different heights.
It looks like in the peer review it was lighter, and then it shifted to wood. Was that based on feedback or your choice?
And you're looking at this front drawing or the side?
The peer
the side,
review,
it was the side one, I think, that you're.
Oops, sorry.
it looks from the peer review like it's a lighter material. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had that, the metal material and lighter stucco on previous to the first and second review. The metal material was removed from the building in its entirety, basically, the panels and the mesh. And again, that's kind of where you can see that it looked a little bit odd to have the two different height elements there. And so we incorporated it into a single height element.
And that's phenolic glass on the,
On the sides?
sorry, spandrel.
Yeah, they're recessed and spandrel glass, so that something can go right up against there in the future.
And is it spandrel glass on the breezeway connecting the two buildings, or is that actual glass?
That's actual glass.
Okay. You had a question?
Ooh.
Saw that coming.
Yeah.
It's probably broken.
What's the interstitial space, the floor structure? Because we have the levels defined, but we don't know what the thickness of the floor structures is to know. I guess a better question is, what's the clear floor-to-ceiling space in each of the three levels?
The floor-to-ceiling space in the first level is 12 feet, actually 13 feet based on the code, so that they could have a drop ceiling or some soffitting or something in there, because 12 is the minimum. And then the floors, the units above are 10-foot ceilings.
Okay,
And then the floor space is 16 3/4, I believe. 14-inch joist, 3/4-inch plywood, and 1.5 inches of concrete.
thank you.
So on the first floor, and there's the one residential unit there, there appears, the hallway appears to be open all the way from the front to the back, and there's no barrier or divider that I can see that gives you some privacy between the commercial front portion and then the largely residential uses in back. So is that correct? It's all
It
open?
is an open shared hallway, and that has to do with the access from the rear parking spaces without going around the block
Right,
to
okay.
get through to the commercial spaces. There is like a fire barrier, but that's only in case of fire would close and
Right, okay, thank you.
No more questions? Okay, so we'll open it up for public comment. And 3 minutes each. I'll call the first 3 people. Norma, April, and Paul. So Norma will be first, then April, and then Paul.
Can Paul go? Do you mind?
Pardon?
Paul go.
Sure.
Good evening, I'm Paul Fertini. I'm the president of the HOA at 396 First Street. I also live at 396 First Street. The other HOA members are here. They live there as well. And then Norma is a resident on First Street, looking in the direction of the new building, I guess building, since there's another one coming right on the back end of this one. And Marion, who just bought the top floor facing east very recently with a lot of sales brochures touting the beautiful cityscape view, which of course is disappearing. So I'm not a fancy lawyer. I don't know all the details and all the tricks. I'm sure I'm up against a lot bigger opponents in that regard than I could ever muscle. I have a real job. I don't have the time to just drop in on the architect's office during the day and sit down for a couple hours and go over things. But living there for the last several years, I think all of us bring a perspective that maybe will help you. If not now, maybe on the next building. The one main thing I would point out before I yield is that none of the discussion here addresses the process of producing this thing. You're going to have construction going on, then you're going to have another building two doors down from it, where you're going to have substantial construction, approximately the same time period, I assume. Then you've got next to 396 First Street an application for a rather large residential structure, again with considerable construction. All the while, the people who live there have to access the street, access their apartment. The people buying and moving in are going to be additional cars for that access, additional traffic. And so I'm wondering if there's anything you can do, while you may not have sort of official code that says you can do this or that, certainly you're being asked for exceptions and exemptions and so forth. Maybe you can put yourself in our position living there and use some common sense and maybe not grant exceptions and variances and so forth until you know that our life isn't going to be hell for 5 years while these guys decide to build and get rich. We understand that the area is going to develop. We appreciate it developing, but there's got to be some common sense to how it goes or people are going to be miserable. And I think the last point would be, look at what's going up. Large 3-story building with a variance up to 54 feet, then the next one's gonna take probably precedent to that and wanna move up higher, and then the one next to us is one's 4.5 feet. You're building another canyon. And I don't know if you read the town crier, but that's probably the main gibberish that's on there back and forth for people who, at the other end of town, 100 First Street, who really don't like all of the construction that was done there. It
I'm gonna have to
created a canyon.
Cut you off there, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask the staff a question? How tall is 396 First Street?
396 First Street to the midpoint of the sloping roofs is approximately 43 feet. The height of the elevator tower in the middle is 51 feet.
But we
Sir,
back
I'm
up
gonna
to the
pass.
Foothill Expressway.
Norma is next.
Sorry if I be repetitive, and I didn't hear most of what went on. Ooh. I'm concerned, as are most of my fellow residents, about things like noise. I don't know if anybody realizes that currently, with an open window onto First Street, I can virtually hear many conversations. The road is too narrow, and we're going to get another big development directly across from us. The noise from the beer walk, or such, whatever it was called recently, I think St. Paddy's Day, the decibels that were allowed were sufficient for a stadium, and ours is going to be now a cavernous tunnel with no light, tremendous noise, rooftop frivolities and noise from this building and from the other building next to the veterinary place. I don't know the address. So I ask you to consider carefully, again, maybe it's too late, things like not allowing noise after hours at nighttime on these two rooftops of these two developments. As it is, we're going to lose not only natural light, but sunlight. And the traffic is going to be a big problem, especially if the buildings are going to be going on and on. You know, other people will want to develop as they see what's going on with these three big projects. Another thing that bothers me is the distance between 396 First Street and the building, well, all the buildings opposite. The road is narrow. When they built 101st Street on Edith, near Edith, between Edith and Safeway, at some point on that road between Main Street and Edith, the road widens so that the residents aren't looking out the window and people staring back at them, and it's quite abominable, really. And another thing that's troubling right now, even with the old buildings, is like, I don't know what you call them, floodlights, very strong night lights. I don't know for what purpose, maybe to deter thieves or something. But this thing, again, talking about stadiums with the sounds problem, this is like a stadium light shining in your eyes. It's very unforgiving and something to be considered as regards the light early in the morning and late at night. And please, please give us back some green that we currently spot between the buildings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. April, and then Eric will be our last speaker unless you fill out a speaker.
Hi, I'm April. I'm also a neighbor on 396. I just wanted to voice just similar concerns that you've heard from other neighbors. This building is massive. My unit actually is going to be encroached upon because I'm facing this building. And it encroaches the view. There's already traffic on First Street from Drager's in the morning with the trucks, and then there's also folks that are bypassing Foothill to go on First Street, so there's already traffic there. So with the additional units, super concerned about that. The garage is not going to be covered, so there's going to be safety concerns around break-ins on the car. Our garage door actually didn't work for a period of 3 months, and we had break-ins right in our garage because it wasn't covered. So I'm just, and also, I mean, Los Altos is such a quaint town, and to have a mechanical parking garage, like, that's just absurd. Like, why would that be something that we would make as a requirement here in this city? We're not in San Francisco. And so I'm having a really hard time kind of seeing the justification for that in itself. So anyway, I just wanted to voice that. Hopefully this is heard, but that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, once again. I'm Eric Steinley, and I come from the other commercial area down along El Camino, and I have a few comments based on my experience there. Number one has to do with the rooftop garden. This is something that is coming into many projects. Speaking as somebody who for 10 years has been an HOA president, when I hear the words rooftop garden, they're only slightly less scary than the words tax audit. Frankly, it's a disaster for an HOA. As time goes on, the HOA becomes legal owner of the building. There will be 12 members of the HOA. They will have to pay for everything that happens. Water intrusion is the most important issue in any building like this, and a rooftop garden is likely to be a good source of that. I really think this is something that everybody who builds these buildings should think about, then go sit down someplace quiet and not do it again. Okay, that would be my advice. I have some other issues about the building itself here. Can we show the title page? I'd like to, the front, it's something that shows the front elevation. Yeah. Is this the pointer thing? Doesn't work. Okay. Now I'm going to walk over and point to something, and then I'd rather not. Okay. Thank you. Looking at these two. When I first looked at this, I'm sorry, the first thing that came to mind was googly eyes. And I can tell you, I'm afraid that that's just what I see when I look at it now. So I think one of the things that I would like to see is perhaps a lightening of that feature. It just, I think, I appreciate the work that has gone into this. I think staff did a wonderful job. That should be a model for everybody else on all of these. But I think that there's a lightening that's necessary in that particular feature. I like many things about the way the design has been put together, but that one strikes me as requiring some more work. I personally would, if I were looking at it, would like to see more wood and less stucco along the front. I think that the side wall on the east side could use some lightening. It's a big blank wall right now, and we don't know when it won't be. And finally, I think that the roof line could use some work. I love my iPad, but I don't really want to live in it, and I think that right now it looks like a bezel around the screen of the iPad. It could use a little bit more variety on the framing, if you like. I'm sorry, I'm not an architect, but the way that the roof line and the sidelines frame the front of it. I think that it tends to look a little bit too boxy. I have spoken of these multi-level developments as piles of shoeboxes. I wouldn't characterize this quite that way, but we want to avoid that in this other commercial and residential area of the city. We'll get back to the piles of shoeboxes on another time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Close public comments and open it up for discussion. You want to start?
Okay, so I went back and looked at the previous design from November 2017. I think from a design standpoint, I think it's an improvement. What you did in terms of bringing the stair tower back, adding stone to the first level, the balconies, awnings, I think it definitely looks more like a residential building than before. In terms of the side elevations, I'm not sure if you could maybe do more, possibly adding a color kind of in between the band, in between the windows, just to soften up the volume. I'm also not sure if it's maybe possible to add like a metal trellis of some sort. I don't know because those stick out, so I don't know if you're allowed to. I think the packet, as I read, it said something about a mural. I just don't know if the joints and the windows would be enough to soften the volume. So that's a concern of mine. In terms of the program, the only comment I really have is regarding the courtyard space. So on the previous design, I don't know if you can pull up the elevation. But on the previous design, there was The whole concept was based on the ribbon, and there was those breezeways on the second and third floor, and so it felt kind of open. But with this new one, you've kind of closed it off into the two separate courtyards. And so the smaller courtyard, that's, I believe, 18 feet by 24 feet with 30-plus foot walls on on three sides. I'm a little bit concerned about how much, how desirable of a space that would be. Also, if you think about kind of that space and in terms of the cubic footage that you're kind of using, or not using, I should say, I think about the other options you can maybe do with that space in terms of program for the building. So again, I don't know what's the best option, but I'm curious if the building would work better with program in that space instead of that small courtyard. And then, yeah, so overall though, I would recommend approval for the project. Like I said, the smaller courtyard does concern me, but I'm not sure if there's a consensus on that, but I would still recommend approval because I don't think it's detrimental to the building.
So some things that I like about the design, and I do think it's improved dramatically since the first time we saw it. I like that landscaping at the front. I think that will make the pedestrian experience nicer as they walk by this building. They'll be interacting with green as opposed to just commercial space. I do like when, I think that the roof deck is a pretty modest size, and I do like when we activate the roof to utilize it. I think that staff should definitely look at the lighting and in which direction it's going, and to the extent that it's going to be invading the space of the people across the street or left and right, we have to be really sensitive to make sure that the lighting is in the right direction and it's the right magnitude. I do agree that I don't envy Unit 9 directly below it, because that is going to be vulnerable to water intrusion for sure. I like that the tower was pulled back. It still reads really large to me, and when I see the iterations that were sent to the peer review in the first one, where essentially the side over the windows right there of that roof deck the stairway seems to end just over those windows, and then the tower is really to the left. And particularly since it's clad all in wood, I feel like from far it really stands out and draws a lot of attention, and I want to see if we can somehow minimize that. And one of the things, I noticed before when the architect was saying it looked weird in the two iterations, if you can go to the page that shows the tower in the original, the peer review, and then the final. One of the things about those iterations is it had two different materials also. So maybe one of the complaints that it looked strange wasn't just that it was two sizes, but it also was two different materials in those two versions. And those two materials were like a third material from this, right now when you look at the current submittal, there's really two materials. And in each of the above ones, there's at least three. So I wonder if we can make that scale feel smaller, but just keep it to two materials. I really want to see the railings. I think one of the deficiencies in the 396 project is, as compared to the residential project on the far other side of First Street, is the material. And one of the big differences is the railing and the stucco, and both the color and quality is very different than just down the block, and it makes a difference. And so if this is going to be and there's a lot of rails. When I look at that front elevation, it reads like almost a horizontal line across, and I have concern about that. I really do like that they differentiate between the residential and the commercial, both with materials. I think that it grounds the first floor. I like that if you're using that El Dorado stone, that material I am familiar with and I like. Cedar is hard to muck up. I'm not sure about both the color of this stucco, and just because there's so much of it. And I don't see the metal. And those sort of four pieces have to work together. The resident who just spoke about the googly eyes, I mean, I don't really read it that way, but I do feel like the courtyard elevation B, which is on page A10. If you look at courtyard elevation B, and then you compare it to the page just before, which shows the front elevation, you put them sort of side by side. I don't know, the combination for me works better in the courtyard elevation B. And I wonder if it's just a matter of, putting a little bit more wood to make that feeling kind of go away, and soften it up a little bit more. I do really like the door, the entry, and that it's clad in wood. And I think that the commercial space really stands out as commercial space. I appreciate the, articulation. I think that works for me. And then when it comes to the height, I mean, this building is 43 feet to the top of the parapet, and 396 is 43 feet to middle of their roof. That building has an elevator tower of 51 feet, and this one is proposed at 54. So it's really hard for me to say that one project can do it, but the other project can when our city the code allows. Well, we're actually giving a variance, but it's one that we gave to the direct neighbor across the street. So it feels.
So just a clarification, it's not a variance. It's a waiver. It's an incentive, and then they're asking for a waiver for the elevator tower. So.
But I don't even think 396 had to ask for this waiver because the code was
changed.
higher. Right. Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with the waiver. And I like the idea of stone, wood, stucco, metal. I just want to make sure it's a high quality material. And I'm not totally clear on it. I think the garage should be restricted. We just had an article in the paper today about the crime wave in Los Altos. That feels like a no-brainer, particularly since it's facing an alley. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, so, I think there's been a lot of progress between that study session and this. So I appreciate the feedback being listened to. First of all, I'm going to make a comment about sort of our zoning, and we've asked for, per the Complete Streets recommendation, a 1-foot easement to add to the sidewalk to make it 6 feet. We can do that, I think, and I'm glad we're widening the sidewalk, but really the better way to do that would be zoning than to ask each applicant to always, add 1 foot or whatever. It's really a less objective approach. I know we're not looking at this ordinance now, but I don't think it's really the cleanest approach to, if we want our sidewalks wider, then we should zone for that. Yes, Zach?
If I could just provide some input.
Yeah.
The goal is, as we did with the First Street from Main Street to Edith, we have a streetscape improvement plan. Our target was to get that project moving a couple years ago. It hasn't gotten off the ground. Due to staffing limitations in our engineering division, that project is now on hold. So envisioning that these projects, we are looking for wider sidewalks. A project at this time is the time to ask for that dedication of an easement. So in anticipation of a plan that's going to seek a wider alley to ensure we have adequate width for access, and we are going to seek a 6-foot wide sidewalk in addition to parking and potentially street trees and other amenities. Now is the appropriate time to ask for that. So short of a plan line where we could actually go and ask for it all from every property at the same time, if we've adopted the appropriate instruments, at time of entitlement with a subdivision map, is the appropriate time to ask for this type of dedication, knowing that over time the goal is to have a continuous 1-foot width added to each side of the street to accommodate that wider sidewalk.
But we just have to be careful to ask it of every project, and it's not in the zoning, and it becomes potentially a bargaining chip. I appreciate that we've now seemed to be agreeing on that, but it's just, now I understand, and thank you for providing the attention, and it's on hold, and we can only do what we can do, but, okay. So thank you for the extra foot easement. So I agree that the garage should be secure. It'll add a little bit of time having to wait for the gate to do whatever it's going to do. But I think it's not that big a building that you're not going to get a queue all the way out to Main Street or anything of people waiting to get in. So I think that's a good thing to do. I'm going to, I think everyone, your googly eyes thing was interesting. I didn't view it as googly eyes. I viewed them as shadow boxes. And I too felt they sort of protruded. I thought that they could be, I thought darkened actually. So whether you use, all the stucco is one color. You might be able to, and as Commissioner Ahi was saying, maybe you can darken something on the side elevation. Maybe you can use that to darken some of the detailing. Or we got a lot of metal railings, as Commissioner Bodnar mentioned. You probably don't need them on the tower because, you know, that's the hallway. And instead, you could choose to outline those shadow boxes in the metal that disappeared, you know, off the tower the previous time. I mean, so I think there's other ways that you could handle that. I agree with Commissioner Bodnar that it works better in the courtyard elevations. But to me, those definitely stood out as, I imagine the royal family in there, standing there and waving. But maybe it's just because you have all sorts of people hanging out. I think the neighbors' comments about the lights are important, but that is built into the requirements, so I don't know if they probably didn't read this whole stack, but all the lights are supposed to be downward facing, and I think we should be very cognizant of being sensitive in this, our more urban area, and along El Camino of doing that. I think we're getting better used to trying to do that, but and as I said, I think it's in here. I want to mention then, we really haven't touched on the density bonus and and so the 10% 1 unit. So all that is great. The public should understand that the way we structured our ordinance, the developer is actually entitled to get an incentive and some waivers. It's not us giving them anything. It's actually how we've drawn up how this works in the city and actually most of the cities around here. Because you're not even asking, so again, this is more for the public's benefit, the developer could actually ask for a density bonus and build an even bigger building. This is why we're getting 5-story buildings in El Camino, because they're requesting the density, invoking the density bonus, if you want to call it that. So this is actually, in my mind, one of the more minimal proposals we've had, and I think it's well within how we've drawn things up. The requests, they're not maxing out on height for the building, they're not maxing out on height. Well, actually, for the tower, it's a little bigger, which reminds me to say I completely agree with Commissioner Bodnar that the previous diagrams showed 2 different materials at 2 different heights. I think if you stair-stepped one material up there, it would actually, again, I'm not an architect, but I think it would help break that block up and might actually work better. But so based on the discussion of, I mean, I'd love to see 2 affordable units rather than 1, but you got in under the wire. Well, not under the wire the way staff described it, but, and so totally at 10% as you were required when your application was complete. And so I support the project, but with, again, the feedback that you've been getting kind of consistently from us up here.
So I also agree that this has made tremendous progress. The part that I think is most successful is the pedestrian experience along First Street, where the differentiation between office and residential entry, where there's pulling back from the street with the ability to have some greenery in an area that may actually get some light. I'm very impressed with that. I think that having a lift system is a way of getting all the parking you can in it. And I'd rather that there be enough parking, really enough parking for the units. And I really applaud the fact that the cars come in from the back, people come in from the front. I like that a lot. I agree that the big stair tower, which we can actually see in the modeling in real life out in the street, I think it would help to look at that again and see if there's some way to change color, change material, change height, do something, because it is very monolithic. But I too had a lot of trouble with the front elevation with the, what Eric called googly eyes, but that detail, because it's one that we're seeing more now as a commercial architectural expression, and I have some concern that it will be very dateable, and it's not classic enough to pass. In 10 years, people are going to be able to put their finger on it. I think the reason that Courtyard A and B are both more successful is because the actual frames are two-story. This is the place where they're single-story, and it is very noticeable there. Similarly, I don't know which commissioner said it, but maybe instead of it being light colored against wood, maybe it should be dark colored so that it recedes instead of popping out at you. So there's two ways of addressing, if that's an element that works for you and feels like something you'd like to do, then maybe that's a way of minimizing the effect of it floating, which I think is what's more disturbing. But I think the fenestration got a lot better. The differentiation between units in terms of the modularity, where it doesn't look like a monolithic building anymore. It's very thoughtfully broken up. I thought you did a very good job with that. I concur with Commissioner Bodnar that the devil's in the details. We really do need to know that it's very, very carefully detailed for the metalwork, but I really love the fact that the streetscape at ground level has awning and signs, and suddenly it feels like a place that you'd like to walk by. There are outdoor lights on all the units, and they are by code required to be shrouded. That's not what the problem is. The problem is people live in these units, and they're going to turn on the lights in their living room, and that light is going to go out in the street, no different than on the other units on the other buildings. And so there is going to be a significant change here. The change is that instead of having one building and very low buildings opposite, we are indeed, as one of the speakers, creating an urban street along this end of First. And what I think is critical and came up in the discussion point is that this is really the first one that we have the opportunity to say we want it to feel different but comfortable in the town. I don't think we need to have sloping roofs. I don't think we need to have shingles. I think we just need to have really good, clean architecture. And I applaud the change in materials, getting the stone at the ground level again. To me, the pedestrian experience along First Street has come along massively, truly massively. And if you could address this frame, which I see on the Mountain View buildings along San Antonio, and we've seen it in another application that came in recently, where it's an architectural expression that I think is more appropriate for commercial. You're using it carefully, maybe a little more detail on it.
I'd like to echo what most people have said in that I think we've seen a lot of progress since our initial review. And it sounds like the peer review also echoed a lot of what we said, so sounds like we're on the right track. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the parking puzzle system, and I'm pretty familiar with them in San Francisco, and I have no issues with them. I'm, I guess, a little surprised that we haven't spent that much time talking about the rooftop deck, because it's, I can see their usefulness in places like the CT zone where it's not, you know, you're not downtown, you can't just go downstairs and walk, and you also have setbacks. And here we're talking about buildings that have 0 lot lines, and having roof decks right next to each other. And how do you control people going across and all of that? And so I don't know whether that's by right or not, or what kind of say we have in it. And if it is by right, then I'd at least like to figure out a way to get the roof deck more towards the center of the building and further away from the sides, so that there's more buffer between the roof deck and the neighbors. I agree that I think having the garage door is important as well. And I think that I'd like to see all the materials together. It's hard to look at these in isolation without the awnings, without the windows, without the railings, the glass, all of that. And I think especially on those side elevations, I'd like to really understand what that detail is for that glass and the framing, because I could envision something of, you know, it's just a recessed opening and we're gluing a piece of glass in there, and it's not going to look elegant. I think somehow wrapping more of the stone around on the ground floor level, you know, whether it's to the first score line, but I think on the side, it feels like there needs just to be more stone at the ground floor level, and the way that just terminates feels awkward. I agree with all the comments around the feature on the front, whether it's the googly eyes or the picture frame, but trying to massage that. And, you know, again, I think you guys made a tremendous amount of progress since this was first presented, and now there's a couple of minor details that need to be flushed out so we can actually have a pretty elegant project. But I'd be interested in everyone else's comments on kind of the rooftop deck and how, I guess, how is, just from, maybe it's a question to the architect first, in terms of how is that working there's a 42-inch parapet, it's 42-inch parapet, and then there's landscaping, and the relationship between those two things and preventing people from crossing over. I didn't really understand the details there.
Yeah, there's you know, a landscape plan with pedestals on the roof deck that creates the surface for the deck to help with the waterproofing issues. And then there's a 42-inch high, you know, per code guardrail basically around the entirety of the areas where people can walk or
Right.
be. At the front, that's partially stucco and a partial glass area, and then on the sides, it's just the parapet height at the, typical guardrail height.
But it's 42 inches from roof deck to parapet, right?
42 inches, yes, from
And
the walking
then-
surface to the parapet.
And then you've got, are those raised planters?
There are some raised planters in there, yes.
And the rest are just potted?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically potted plants and raised planters. It's the landscape page. So the raised planters really keep you kind of away from that edge adjacent
Right.
to the building, the potential building to the left. And then really, we're not close to the building to the right, obviously. And it's blocked off, from there back to the stair tower with the guardrails.
Yeah, I guess because I don't really understand what's raised planter, what's plantings, and so, one concern is you've got I don't know if it's 18 inches or whatever it is, a raised planter, and then someone steps up on that, whether it's an adult or a child, and then you don't have the full 42 inches at the end.
Yeah, the planters are actually 3.5 feet tall, 42 inches. So the edge of the planter is at the required guardrail height.
Got it, so that prevents, I mean,
I'm not going to say it prevents somebody from doing something they
Right.
shouldn't otherwise do, but it is at the, code.
okay. And then there's no one from Complete Streets here, is there? Yeah, I guess, just in terms of rounding out my comments, because I don't know necessarily, it'd be interesting to get their perspective. 'Cause I don't know necessarily that widening the sidewalk at the expense of landscaping.
We have their memo. I mean, you're right.
Yeah,
It's been
but
nice
just-
to have some.
Yeah, it all goes to them, and so, we're,
It was at the Complete Streets Commission meeting that they desired a wider landscape, inconsistent with other projects that are moving forward in the process. Recommended to design for a 6-foot wide sidewalk.
and where's the extra foot coming from? It's coming from landscaping.
It
Right,
would be
but-
coming,
We had already pushed the planters back to provide seating that would not encroach into the sidewalk. And so really, the 12 inches was,
we're asking for, a walkway, an easement for that walkway area.
So does this plan that we have reflect that extra 12 inches on the sidewalk?
It wasn't 100% clear to me, so there is a condition in the resolution that does require that easement, that 1-foot easement. So that particular detail, it wasn't quite clear to staff whether the landscaping and the planter box and seat wall was all the way out to the edge of the public right-of-way. So that's why we added that condition in there. Yeah, so to the right side of the building where Zach's zooming in right now, it's a little bit less clear whether that seat wall at that scale, whether it allows for that.
For reference, that little dash line is the 2-foot required setback in the CT. So midway through that first dash line you see at the back of the property line would be the 12 inches of pedestrian access easement.
And there'll be new sidewalk.
Yeah.
So then.
So it's eating, that's right, it's eating
Yeah.
into the landscape.
It's eating into the landscape, that's the bottom line. So what they're showing there, the planter box would be, on the right side, would be smaller. or gone, really,
Right.
if you, yeah.
Right. So it's not gonna look, I mean, everything that you just talked about, it's not gonna look like that.
Well, no, but it is, they're putting landscaping along First Street. They're putting architectural landscape details, signage and awnings, and that experience of the building going in and out, so there are kind of fat spaces and then skinny spaces. Maybe there'll be a really skinny planter on the right-hand side, because you can do, we've seen decorative grasses in a 1-foot from front to back planter. As long as it's deep and the roots can go in, you can have tall grasses, which will look really fine. I think the landscape architect will need to take a look at this before it goes to city council, but in spirit, I feel like their approach on the First Street pedestrian experience with landscape and articulation has been a really good example. In fact, I would like to say that I move that we recommend to City Council approval of design review and subdivision applications 17D02 and 1717 SD02 per the findings and conditions, and with the incorporation of, we should start the list, securing the garage, looking at the elevator stair tower for modification, looking at the projected detail at the front elevation, looking at color or texture breaking up the sidewall more, which I would like to say I thought they did a good job. It looks like there are windows even if they aren't. What else did we talk about? And railing details really clarified so that we know.
Less of them.
Yes, and less of them. And I think there is an issue that I'd like to bring up. This came up in an early, well, so that's the motion. Then there'll be discussion. Do I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We had someone at one point show us a building where there were all glass railings, and the glass that was the edge of the unit was floor to ceiling. And the light that came out of that was going to be staggering. And so there's a choice here to have a semi-transparent railing at the street, which means that light will come through it. And so maybe that's spandrel glass instead of all of it railing, something to think about, because this is turning out, it's like, it's going to be like Paris, you know, the building is right across the street, and it would be nice if we had some control and some privacy even, because people who aren't keeping their apartments neat and tidy are going to be able to look right through the railing into it. And if the railing gave them a little bit of privacy and still maintain the scale, that might be something to think of. Do you think we should, well, do you think we should continue it to see what's coming back? I mean, I made the motion, we can talk about it. We could have done better.
Right, we didn't actually sign off on the final product.
Your next meeting will be the first Thursday in May, so it's set up the 4th.
I mean, I agree. I think that we haven't seen enough materials to make I haven't seen enough materials to feel comfortable. Because there's some major elements that typically get presented that we haven't seen.
Mehruz, what are you thinking?
I think, like I said, I would recommend approval. I think that the things that were discussed, I think are things that they could definitely do before city council. I do think that the stair tower is a big issue in terms of maybe stepping it down more, but overall, I think that the project is developed enough.
Okay, so I could withdraw the motion. I just wanted to get a sense of where we were.
Yes,
Did you want to ask something?
I just wanted to, state that we're, happy to work on each of the items that has been mentioned with staff and/or directly with a subcommittee of some sort. And, obviously our preference would be to move forward with the knowledge that we're going to work on the detailing, the window frame areas, including a garage gate, and some alternatives to step the stair tower.
We should be more careful. I withdraw the motion.
Continue to a date certain?
Yeah, I move that we continue this application 17D02 and 1717 SD02 to a date certain, which would be May 4?
May the 2nd.
May the 2nd.
That is the meeting that you are scheduled to consider the project for 25 University as well.
What do you think about that, staff?
Well, it's really the pleasure of the commission. If you're not comfortable with this on this stage, I think you're asking the applicant to come back and address the items that you brought up this evening. But
Of course, if they were addressed well enough, it could wind up on the consent calendar.
Yeah, I
We
think
could-
some of these things are simple enough to do that we could do. I mean, we don't have to spend another 2 hours, presumably, because I think you've understood the feedback. So
Well,
would
we
that
can-
be an approach?
it would be an approach. We will work closely with the applicant to address your concerns, and if we're comfortable that we felt that the applicant has addressed all of them, we will put it on consent.
I'll second the motion then.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. We'll go to commissioners' reports and comments. I don't think we've had any.
Oh, yeah. So I was at one of the city council meetings at the request of John Biggs when they were going to discuss alternatives to story poles. There is a subcommittee that Councilperson Ananda and Pepper are on that's looking at it as a total policy, but they were not willing as a group to accept any of our recommendations except that the applicants are now allowed to use pennants, strung pennants, instead of the orange mesh, which are much lighter in weight and less wind subject, so hopefully won't be as difficult to maintain in tough situations. The sense I got of the council is that story poles are here for a while.
Potential future agenda items?
Well, I think we've been requested to, I'm supposed to cover next week's council meeting, but I think we were all requested to do a study session, which will be at the end of council meeting. Does that mean we're going to start at 11:30 p.m. on the study session?
We might. You have density bonus and a discussion on the Housing Accountability Act. Heather will be doing a presentation. And then the council's also requested a discussion on the CT district to see if they would like to, what they would like to do with respect to CT zone district and next steps there. So you have been invited to that. And then following up on that, your meeting of April the 18th has been canceled. We have a number of commissioners that will be absent because of holiday schedules. Then following up on that, the council meeting of April the 23rd, your planning process amendments that you've recommended under the city council are going to be considered on that date. And then we have your May the 2nd meeting, which just grew by one potential item, the potential consent item for the project at 389 First Street that you considered this evening. And as Mr. Dahl mentioned, you do have 425 First Street coming to you on that evening for you to consider. And then for your second meeting in May, which is the 16th of May, we're going to be doing a downtown vision presentation and giving you copies of the downtown vision and continuing your discussion on floor area ratios to develop a recommendation on the city council. And we will also include the, as we mentioned at the last meeting, the purpose statements in each of the zone districts. We'll be giving you copies of that, so at least you have that to hopefully frame your discussion on floor area ratios. And that's far enough out in the horizon.
I just want to
for us,
make
right?
sure, so the April 18th meeting, which would be our second meeting this month, is the one that's canceled.
That's
But
correct.
we do have 2 meetings in May.
True.
Okay, thank you.
The 2nd and the, what did I say, the 16th?
And the city council meeting is still in chambers, or?
No, the council meeting will be in
The
here.
council meeting
Yeah.
will be here, too?
In fact, I think all of our meetings, oh, is that? I
Oh, it's at
apologize.
Lacey.
It's at Lacey.
Okay.
Yes, so a little bit bigger room for us all to meet in.
Thank you, Yvonne, for the reminder.
You're welcome.
I had a,
We're,
I had a couple comments. So this CT zone specific plan, I was looking into it and I just wanted to know if I'm willing to maybe volunteer to like be, I don't know if a subcommittee is what we want to do, but I'm willing to kind of work on it. I've been kind of looking at the past agenda items and I just didn't know what the process would be.
well, first, we're going to get direction from the city council on what they would like to see accomplished for the CT zone. And then once
Okay.
we have that, then we should have some direction at the next meeting. We'll be able to better accept, volunteers for committee work and so forth.
Okay. And then the only other thing I had to say was about the story pole policy. So I thought Commissioner Bresic and staff did a really good job presenting. This might just be my issue, but I just thought that kind of hearing comments about the story pole policy in regards to how, quote unquote, the public wants it or the public needed it, I went and did some research, you could say, and there's actually no objective evidence anywhere that the public wanted it. So again, it's not really a big topic, but I just think that moving forward, if we're gonna talk about the story pole policy, which is fine, I think we should talk about it more objectively and not based on conjecture, I would say.
Well, I think the piece that I thought made the most sense was when one of the city council people said that coming out of the downtown building committee, no more surprises. That was very important. The piece that disappointed me most was that, as we know, there are some people who take advantage of the system, and we have story poles up for an inordinate length of time. And yet there wasn't the will on city council to accept the fact that at a certain point, if you haven't seen it, you can look at the picture. They pointed out that the timing, maybe we were not good in our recommendation, is it comes to us and the story poles go up and then the town crier comes out and then people go out and take a look at it. So we had left it, we said take them down as soon as possible. We probably should have said 2 weeks after or 1 week after the town crier comes out, to the effect that between those two things, there would be a finite period of time. But that was the biggest disappointment for me because people are gaming the system and it's really awful.
Yeah.
Can you just come up to the?
Anita Enander, City Council member, and I'm here as the liaison. So just a couple of quick comments, one to yours and about the Downtown Buildings Committee, since I did sit on that committee as well. And we did have objective evidence that people wanted story poles. We had survey information during the course of that research that people, and Phoebe did report accurately, and she did a great job at the meeting. People didn't want surprises, and the general public feeling was that without story poles, they really didn't feel that photos and those kinds of things that had been presented were sufficient. As to the second comment that Ms. Bresic was just speaking about, I think that was the reason why the council asked for there to be Jan Pepper and I, who serve on the governance committee, together to look at specifically that kind of issue. I think to be able to spend the time talking more so than council could do in that session at the time, because it was already very late, about whether there were some better ways to handle when we might be able to get them down and get them down sooner.
Sorry, one thing. So I understand that, but the Downtown Buildings Committee, in their final recommendation, the 42 recommendations, it didn't mention story poles. And also when it was first brought up, the Planning Commission at that time rejected it 7-0. And so there wasn't a public outreach when it went back. So all I'm saying is that I understand that maybe the public wants it, but there's no proof. And at that time, it wasn't a situation where it was going to be set in stone. If you go back and watch, it was something that was going to be analyzed and reviewed, and that was 5 years ago. So it's not something that has been tested over time, and you see all these exemptions coming. So I think it does need to be looked at more strictly than how it's been looked at. And I don't think we should mislead by saying that the public wants it when we don't know that for a fact.
We're getting a little bit into the realm of a debate, and we don't have that agendized for this
I have
evening, so-
a future agenda item, which is, I noticed that there was a waiver asked for the height of the elevator tower. And you may remember, we talked about how important it was that the technology would require, and that if we made it too short, people are going to have to keep coming in and asking for exceptions. That's not the right word, but they're going to come back and say, I cannot do it in the zoning code. I need some relief. And so maybe as a future agenda item, we can have staff look at elevator technology and give us a more independent analysis of how high does it have to be to get it sticking up above the roof.
I would also add the parking. I think we can assume that the lift system is the future.
Coming.
And that to the extent our 9 by 8 by 7 doesn't
18.
account, right, sorry, 9 by 18 by 7 doesn't account for lift systems, we carve out some lift language. So it's not also a waiver every time.
And this is just a point, John, would you like us to keep our packets, Steve? Oh, you mean put it in the folder, so that you don't have to print this out again with... Yeah, and what about the plans? Those might change. But we'll keep it, okay, so we'll keep that whole section, so you don't have to reprint anything except new materials. Okay?
Okay, that we can adjourn.
Yes.